My friend Lee, um, this guy was his cellmate for a while, and every night this guy would go to sleep the same time, and he would wake up at the same time. He would miss breakfast. He never ate breakfast, and usually inmates, they will go to breakfast. Okay, but this guy would not go out, not leave his cell, and you didn't have to go. It was your option, and they don't care if you don't want to get up to eat. That's your problem. I mean, they're not going to make you go to chow. So he would sleep in every day. And so one day he said, "Man, with the small amount of food that we get, he goes, how can you manage to miss breakfast every morning?" And this individual told him, he goes, "Your world is not like mine." This is a weird story. And I think you might have heard this one, Tony. And he said, when I'm asleep, I sleep for 12 hours every day. And my friend Lee said, "Yeah, I noticed. I noticed that every day you go to bed at the same time and you wake up at the same time." Like this guy would literally go to bed before lights, like right before lights out, and then he would wake up
like a program.
Like a program. And he said, "My world is different." He goes, I'm in this world for 12 hours. He goes, and then when I go to sleep, I go into another reality that's like this world, but I'm a completely different person. And he goes, and then in that world, I'm up for 12 hours, and then I go to sleep, and I'm here for 12 hours. And he goes, and I've been doing this for 22 years. And he was like, "So in the other world, you're 22 years old?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm 45 in this world. I'm 22 in that world." And he was like, and it started the first day I came to prison here. And he goes, and it's not like you would think. He goes, you would think that it's some kind of psychosis that this, caused from going to jail. He goes, no. He goes, it was like I was a child. I went to sleep. I woke up and I was like a child. He goes, but I have my memories, like the first 2 years or whatever. He goes, I was like a baby. I would just have these weird dreams where I was just laying around screaming and crying, like literally like he was a baby. And then he said that about 2 or 3, I started developing the memories, you know what I mean? Like I started remembering. And he goes, I started to tell my mom and dad in the other world that I would go to sleep and that I was a black man and that I would wake up and I would be in jail. And I was in prison. He goes, but when I was little, I couldn't describe to them what it was like, what was going on. So he said in his other life, they sent him to a psychiatrist. They said, something's wrong with our son. He believes that he's this black man that's in jail, that he's a convict, and that he got, caught doing something, and he went to prison for it. And he's been in there for, whatever. And he only had like a little bit of time left. And he was thinking, he was telling my friend Lee, he goes, I don't know what I'm going to do when I get out, He goes, I'm so used to this routine, the last 22 years, And he said, so he goes, tell me about this other life you're living, And so he said, it's weird. He goes, in the other life, I have a job. I'm now married, and we're expecting our first child. He says, believe it or not, he goes, I'm a reddish, blonde-haired white guy. And so my friend starts laughing at this dude. He goes, you're dreaming, you're living a fantasy. You're wishing that you
sounds like the perfect life.
Yeah, you were free. And he goes, dude, no. He goes, I have a stressful life. I got problems in the other world. It's like, he goes, I don't know how this came about or what this is. He goes, the only thing I can think of is it's like I am one soul in 2 lives. He said, but in the other world, it's a little different than our world. He goes, than the way I remember it. He says, we have cell phones, we have all that, he goes, but I really think it's a parallel life, a parallel world. He said that the president we have here was not the same president. The presidents were different. There were different things. There were different, like places, all these different things that you would think.
Events, maybe.
Yeah, things were different. The timeline was a little bit different. Not 100% like, the same. It was just like it was off, And he said that there were certain things that were just different, he started describing it to him, and he goes, there are brands of cars that we don't have in this world. There are just different types of deals, we have. He said even the name of his phone was called a Coleco or some sort of weird name, he said it was. And my friend went into detail about this guy, And then I thought maybe my friend was pulling my leg. But then there was a guy that was locked up with both of them. And this guy, about a year after this initial story was told to me, and your stepdad, I think, might have actually heard the story too, Tony. I know my brother and Scorpion and Willie and all those guys heard this story because they knew this guy very well. And when his buddy got out, and I was going to say his nickname, but he's was part of that clique, whatever. He confirmed about this guy. He said, no, dude, he goes, I've heard this guy's story before. Not all of it, not to the extent that Lee did, because Lee was his cellmate. And he said, but, and it was because they separated them because they were part of a clique,
Mm-hmm.
So they put Lee with this guy, and so they couldn't be around their people or whatever.
The guy was there for 22 years,
yeah.
I'm sure.
So yeah, and he was pretty laid back. He said he was an easy cellmate to get along with, The guy had his little habit. And he said that he never, ever saw this guy once move or get up for those 12 hours that he slept. He's like, he didn't get up to go to the bathroom, nothing. People sometimes will wake up to use the bathroom, nothing. He said in the morning, he would get up like methodically, go to the bathroom, do his business, and then he would start his day. And then he would just do his time, go to sleep. And then for 12 hours, he was asleep. And he said he timed it. And it was precise. You know what I mean? Like, it was like he would go to bed. I think he said 9 to 9 or something like that, or 8 to 8. I can't remember exactly. It was years ago when he told me this story, but I still remember most of it. And he told me this. He said that this guy swore up and down that he lived another life, and he was writing this stuff down, like in journals. He had these journals. And once he would fill up 2 or 3 of them, he would send them to his daughter. And it was chronicling and detailing his life, according to my friend.
On the other side. And what he was doing in that life. And then he was writing his life down in this world, And so he said that on the other side, he was doing the same thing. He was talking about this other life he had. And he said to this day, he goes, his parents on that other side, they think he's crazy when he starts talking about it. He goes, dude, I'm telling you, I have a routine on that side, just like I do this side. I sleep for 12 hours, and he goes, I'm always awake in the daytime. Like he's not awake at night at all on either side. Like when he wakes up on that side, it's morning. You know what I mean? Like when he goes to bed at night, like, when he first goes to bed, he wakes up in the other world and it's morning. He doesn't have dreams like we do. And he just lives his life, and he's like, I have to go through the same struggles and everything that any normal person would in that other life. He goes, I go to work, said he was working at a call center, and then he worked at a suicide hotline. And he said that he worked as a phone representative. He's working all these different jobs where we talk to people on the phone for an insurance company, which was his current job. And he said that they were expecting their first child. And he said that it's just become a part of his life. Like this is who he is. But he said when he's on the other side, like when he's like whatever, he has memories like of everything that this other life, like as him as the black man, he has all of his memories. And he can recount everything from his childhood when he was a black child growing up in Georgia, which is originally where he's from. And so he said, dude, my parents on the other side think I'm crazy. My friends think I'm crazy. The psychiatrist all told my mom and dad that I had a psychosis. He goes, but that's not what it is. He goes, I'm literally living 2 lives. And he goes, and unless you experience it, there's no way to wrap your mind around it. And so my friend Lee told me, he goes, dude, he's either the best con artist I've ever met in my life, or he's telling the truth. Or maybe he just really believes this stuff, maybe it's just nonsense and he just believes it. But the bottom line is that is what this guy told him. And my friend says to him, who am I to argue about it, And he said that, it's not dreamlike at all. It's like living 2 realities that are exactly like our reality. It's like it's like you go to sleep. The minute you go to sleep, you wake up and you're in another reality, and you're always in that same reality, other reality, and you're just living your life like the whole day and whatever. And then at exactly 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock, whatever it was, he said that he goes to sleep, and then he wakes up and he's in jail. And he said, obviously the bad part of his life is being in jail, but he said it's a lot more, less stressful because he's been in it for so long. He's used to the routine.
And the psychiatrist that he was sent to diagnose him with this issue started with a therapist, then he became a psychiatrist. And they diagnosed him with some kind of whatever, and they said that it was a coping mechanism for him being in jail. But he doesn't believe that. He thinks that this is real. This is real. This is what's really happening. And when my friend Lee pressed him and said, what do you think this is? Like your honest opinion, what do you think that's going on here? He says it's like a glitch, like a mistake, like I'm not supposed to be doing this. He goes, but then again, maybe it is. I'm supposed to be doing this. You know what I mean? Well, you as your mom being a Buddhist and you being raised in Buddhism,
Yeah.
have you ever heard of anything like this?
Not specifically like this, where it's, this is like living half lives basically in two different worlds.
Well, I have heard something like this. I've heard tons of experiences like this. This is exactly what all of the people enrolled in the, quote, secret space program are reporting, this 20 and back program. They all report spending 20 years in another reality, or more, some of them more. So I'm just going to go ahead and play the Tony Rodriguez interview with Dr. Michael Sala. I'm going to play that back to back with what you just heard, and then we'll talk about some of the similarities and some of the differences.
Tony Rodriguez is a secret space program witness, and he has written a new book about some experiences that he recalls that covered a 10-year period during the middle of his 20 and back program, where he got to spend time in a Star Maker project. Well, welcome back, Tony, to Exopolitics Today.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Sala. It's great to be here. It's been far too long.
Your book, Ceres Colony Cavalier, really, it was a bestseller and really kind of like has given you a lot of attention, but you also went out into the field to kind of like validate your experiences. So you want to share what you've been doing to validate the experiences that you describe in Ceres Colony Cavalier.
Absolutely. And it's ongoing. So it's not something that I researched years ago and ran out of material. I keep finding new evidence. So the more I look for it, the more I'm finding evidence. Recently, we found the plane in Peru that is described, the C-46 Commando. It's something that I went on record, I believe, as early as when I was filming with you. I know it was very soon in my memory recall that I recalled that it was a C-46 Commando. And I'd been looking up the plane. It's a unique plane, cargo plane, that we have been using in Peru. And we started talking, and I asked them throughout, and we had to have a translator, so they spoke Spanish. These were guys that were in the Peruvian Air Force, one of them for almost 30 years. And he's still active, still flying. And I said, in the middle of talking, I asked, what do you know about a C-46 Commando that the narcos used? And he said, oh, the Commando, he said, that's in Pucallpa. And real quick, just matter of factly, he said that he was involved in working with the Air Force in the war on drugs in 1990, and they had did a raid on the narcos that had planes based in a place, Puerto Maldonado, which is I believe it's 17 miles or maybe more than that, 30 miles east of where I was staying when I was in Peru during my 20 and back. And so they were storing the plane there. And he said, we confiscated it in 1990 from the narcos in the war on drugs. And they were going, in the early 90s, they were going to these towns that were known for shipping cocaine, among other drugs, out of Peru. And they would blow up the runway and confiscate all their equipment. So that was the war on drugs in the early 90s. Everybody remembers it. Anyhow, I went and immediately looked, and in Pucallpa, at the bottom south end of the public runways where they keep these planes, and sure enough, the plane that I remember and that I described is currently there, as far as I know. And about 2 weeks later, one of the guys in the Zoom call was able to go there physically and get pictures of the plane directly. And so it's something it's another element of my testimony that I called out years ago, 6 years ago, that was confirmed only recently. Went back and revisited my own testimony, my own evidences, and so that I can just present. So people attack me and say, Tony, for whatever reason, and I don't believe you, I can say, well, that's great, but you have to explain this away. You have to explain the fact that I know my way around Peru very well, and I've never been there. And along with Seattle and Inyokern and Ceres and other events that overlap greatly with other testimonies. So I'm just polishing my own testimony rather than jumping into the fray, because we're really seeing a concerted effort to greatly dissipate the information of the secret space program.
Well, that is very important, because I know that the intelligence community are trying to muddy the waters, putting out a lot of contradictory information, getting their assets to muddy the waters. And, we know that they do that because there was one of the documents that was released by Edward Snowden showed that the NSA was working with Britain's GCHQ and the other Five Eyes intelligence agencies to conduct covert deception, to conduct online covert deception programs, and some of those dealt with UFOs. So, there's a document that actually shows that this is going on. So it's very important that we do make the effort to validate our testimonies, people who have had these experiences, and that's something to your credit that you have made that effort. I mean, clearly, trying to prove that you were on Ceres or you were on Mars or on the moon, that's always going to be difficult. But, that you were first, for 5 years, you were first in Peru and then in Washington State, used as a slave, exploited. Those are things that you can show, you can prove, and you've made progress in that. And that's wonderful that you've been able to track down some Peruvian pilots that corroborate the plane that you were taken on when you were doing the drug smuggling with the cartels there in Peru.
Okay, I want to break in really quick and lay a little more context for what he's talking about. He didn't elaborate a lot on the early days in this interview, but most of the secret space program people report being child sex slaves or human trafficking victims. So in the real world, not in the virtual reality, not in this 20 and back, whether you think it's an alternate reality or a real space program, whatever, not that part of it. But before, they were in cyberspace or the AI time augmentation of this 20 and back program. Before that, many, if not most of them, report being in this satanic ritual abuse situation and or in these sex slave programs of human trafficking. So I wanted to pop in this little clip about the Finders cult. Most of you have heard about the CIA ties to the Finders cult, and that it's alleged that the CIA was trafficking children. And these poor children were kept in cages, and they didn't have any sort of human knowledge of like what a bathroom was or what running warm water was, or like on the police officer's desk, like what a stapler was. And all of these children that they rescued when they arrested these two guys trafficking for the Finders cult, the CIA intervened and said, no, give the children back, and called off the police and all the other agencies. And suddenly the corrupt judge just dropped the charges and set them all free. But we still have the police records, we have the hospital records, all of the stuff showing that they were victims of sexual abuse. None of them were wearing underwear when they were found and all crammed in the back of this van. And one of the boys was so sexually abused that he had no sphincter control. Right while he was standing in the police station, he just, feces ran down his legs because he had been so abused. And despite all of the horrific evidence, the CIA intervened and made sure that these children were put back in the hands of their traffickers, and everybody just kind of swept it under the rug. But what Tony Rodriguez was just talking about, these cargo planes that were used, that also ties into this Finders cult who was trafficking the children, because the founder of the Finders cult, supposed alleged founder of the Finders cult, his wife worked for the CIA. He was ex-military intelligence, but swears he retired. But his wife worked for the CIA, and his son worked for Air America. Now, Air America, now it's common knowledge. It's a fact. It's been declassified. But back then, it was top secret. So Air America was an American passenger and cargo airline established in 1946 and covertly owned and operated by the Central Intelligence Agency from 1950 to 1976. It supplied and supported covert operations in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, including providing support for drug smuggling in Laos. So I wanted to point out that he has found evidence to back up that he was one of these human trafficking victims involved in human slave trade, and that it's a real thing that was run by the CIA. They were involved in drug smuggling. They were involved in human trafficking. And if you know the facts of the case with the child trafficking rings and the Finders cult, that they had links that he would constantly, he could just go to the military, even though he said he wasn't in the military anymore, that he could just go to a military base and get on one of these flights to China. And some of the children, even though they didn't have names, these children were literally kept in cages. They did not have names, so they gave them names for the police report, or they had like BB. One of them would call one of the other little children BB, so they wrote that down as their name. But even though they didn't have names, some of them had been taught Chinese. Not only did they find floppy disks and records when they raided the warehouses of the Finders cult, tying them for orders. There were orders on the computer, literal orders for like 2 children ordered by a rich guy in Hong Kong, to be delivered. So they found a Chinese to English dictionary in the van with the children, and one of the little girls had been trained already to count to 10 in Chinese. So anyway, this is all so disturbing and sick, but we have to keep the big picture. We have to keep our eyes on the big picture. Tony's story matches up with all of these other mysteries and phenomena, surrounding the CIA and what's really going on with these MK Ultra and missing people. And not just missing people, they have a breeding program. And that's what is also exposed in the Finders cult, that they had breeders who worked for the CIA. These women in the cult, they had children, and that's who these children were. They identified the mothers, but the mothers had the children and then gave them to the traffickers. And the traffickers said, oh, well, these children are being weaned. They literally told the police they're being weaned from their mothers. It's just unbelievable that they turned these poor children back over into the hands of these traffickers. But this information also completely lines up with what so many other of these SRA victims report. They said, I was born into this family. My grandmother did this. She trafficked me. My parents did this. Johnny Gosch's dad was part of the Franklin cover-up. He was identified by the boys from Boys Town several states away. And then, we've played Noreen Gosch's testimony before, that she believes her husband was in on it. And that's what we see with the Finders cult, that the CIA has breeders, like broodmares, to have these children. And we saw it with the Epstein Ranch, the Epstein Baby Ranch. Remember, after Virginia Roberts got too old to be peddled to the pedophiles, then they asked her to start having babies for them. Most of the people having these children in these breeding programs were child sex slaves themselves, just like Virginia Roberts talked about. That's why these women in these satanic cults will turn their children over, because they don't know any better. They themselves were raised in cages. And the 2 men in the Finders cult who were arrested trafficking these children, one of them was clearly in an MK Ultra trance. This one over here, he seemed to be the handler or the one who did all the talking, but they said this one, he just went into some sort of trance-like state and couldn't even talk. But yet here he was now being used to deliver these children the same way that he was abused, in my humble opinion. But in the Boys Town case and the Franklin cover-up case with all the politicians in Nebraska, Paul Bonacci, you can go and watch, like right down here, here's his deposition. He testified under oath multiple times, not just in depositions, but in the court cases where he talked about being an MK Ultra victim and that he was there when they kidnapped Johnny Gosch. And he was one of the first ones to sexually assault Johnny Gosch, even though he was one of these child sex slaves himself. They made him. He goes into terrible, disturbing detail in his testimony. That was like the next step up. They made him then abuse the boys below him to get them ready. Sort of like the way Ghislaine Maxwell, when she went to the schools and the different places and recruited these little girls and then brought them in to Jeffrey Epstein to train them. She literally told them, this is what you're expected to do. And she trained them. And of course, she was born into one of these families. You know, her dad was Robert Maxwell from the intelligence agencies. So I would say there's probably a pretty good chance that she was also satanic ritually abused and sexually abused before she rose to the ranks of then being the madam who was bringing the other children into the network. So this lines up, all of it lines up all the way right into the secret space program and the CIA using Air America cargo planes for human trafficking and drug trafficking. This is all real. It's an unbelievably large secret society, top secret society.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy.
So before we get back to Tony's testimony, I'm just going to play a quick clip about the Finders cult and the CIA ties to it, just to kind of give some context for anybody who's unaware about these trafficking rings, because this is important for the next testimony that we have about the adrenochrome trip report, because that guy came out of the drug cartels. He worked in the mountains with the illegal drug trade, and that's where he was introduced to the children, the immigrant children that were being brought in and used for the drug cartel to produce this drug, adrenochrome. So this is all going to tie together, so I'm going to go ahead and play it right now.
Curious myself, I decided to look into the documents, only to find that a lot of their wording was redacted or blacked out. And so it began. I became interested in learning more about this supposed satanic cult from the 80s, but through my research of newspaper articles, official investigation reports, and FBI documents, I honestly wasn't prepared for the mountains of information that waited for me. It really seemed like every other source had something new for me to read. So why isn't this talked about more? In this video, I will try to encompass my research in a straightforward timeline of events. On Wednesday, February 4th, 1987, an anonymous call was made to the Tallahassee Police Department. The call stated that two well-dressed men were seen watching over 6 dirty and unkept children, ages 2 to 7, at a playground in Myers Park, Tallahassee. According to an official report of investigation, the children were covered with insect bites and very dirty. Most of the children were not wearing underwear, and all the children had not been bathed in many days. Whereas the 2 men were found wearing suits and ties. Even more disturbing was their vehicle, a 1979 Dodge van. Inside the van were maps, books, letters, 20 floppy disks, a computer, and a mattress. The vehicle was also described as being foul-smelling, and it appeared as though all 8 of them had been living inside that van for quite some time. The 2 men explained to the police that they were the children's teachers, and that they were driving to a school for brilliant children in Mexico. Police asked the men where the children's mothers were, to which they said they were being weaned from their mothers. The men were arrested on multiple accounts of child abuse, and all 8 of them were taken into custody for further questioning. The men identified themselves as Michael Houlihan and Douglas Ammerman. When questioned, the 2 men were initially apprehensive to communicate. Some reports claim that one of them wouldn't cooperate at all and would enter a trance-like state. Authorities turned their efforts to questioning the 6 children. And this is where things started to get unsettling. The children were identified as Mary Houlihan, Max Livingston, Benjamin Franklin, Honeybee Evans, BB, and John Paul Houlihan. Evidently, these were not the children's real names because they didn't have proper names. According to the police, 5 of the 6 children were uncommunicative and didn't seem to recognize common items or modern technology, such as typewriters, hot water, or electricity. The 6th and oldest child, Mary, showed signs of sexual abuse. Mary fortunately was able to communicate and give information to investigators. Here's some of what she said. Mary confirmed that the 2 men were indeed their teachers. However, she wasn't sure where they recently were or where they were going. When asked what her last name was, she replied, "Which one?" She stated that they lived in Washington in a house with other children and adults. She and the other children mainly survived on a raw fruit and vegetable diet, but were visibly malnourished and only fed as a reward for good behavior. When asked what the 2 men taught them, she responded with, "How to play games." She said they would receive instructions from their leader, a man known as the game caller or game leader, later to be known as a man named Marion Petty. Based on what Mary said, the Tallahassee police decided to contact the DC police in an attempt to identify the 6 children, only to learn that they were already aware of this group, who called themselves the Finders. According to a 1987 article from the Washington Post, one of the first newspapers to publicize this event, records from the U.S. District Court in Washington showed that an anonymous, confidential source told authorities that the Finders were a cult that conducted brainwashing techniques at a Northeast Washington warehouse and an apartment building near Glover Park. This source told of being recruited by the Finders with promises of financial reward and sexual gratification, and of being invited by one member to explore Satanism with them. According to the affidavit, the source told authorities that the children were used in rituals by the members. And so, on the following Thursday and Friday, Washington police raided these 2 areas that were given to them by this confidential police source. Furthermore, evidence found within the seized vehicle pointed to a 90-acre Virginia farm owned by a man named George Marion Petty. Virginia State Police were contacted to visit and search the area as well. At the warehouse in Washington, police found that the windows were boarded shut, and the building was padlocked with a heart-shaped lock. Inside were newspapers and mattresses scattered across various rooms, as if someone had lived there. On one wall were shelves with obscure books, and on the other was a huge map of the entire world. Most disturbingly, DC police uncovered large plastic bags filled with wallet-sized photographs. According to the U.S. Customs Service, some of these photos were of children, similar to school photos, naked children, children engaged in what appeared to be cult rituals involving the slaughtering of goats with 3 men wearing white robes, and one photo in particular that showed a child in chains. At the apartment building near Glover Park, neighbors were questioned and confirmed that 2 of the photographed children lived in that building. They also explained that only women and children lived there, but that they would occasionally see men visiting the house. One woman said that the children were often so dirty that they were easy to notice.
Okay, let me point out, you don't got to be Sherlock Holmes to see that this is the exact definition of every sex trafficking ring. You have it's a brothel but they're held prisoners. So the warehouse and stuff is padlocked on the outside. So they're held prisoner inside this warehouse with just mattresses. And it says that the only people who lived in these brothels were the women and children, but people saw men coming and going. I mean, this is the story of every human trafficking sting. Just go through the news reports. They're all held in these apartment buildings or these warehouses. It's the same thing. And it's happening all over the country and all around the world. This is a bigger black market than any other black market on the earth. Just a coincidence that the Finders cult warehouses and apartment buildings just happen to be in Washington, D.C., in the government's backyard, the same way that Comet Pizza was in Washington, D.C. The D.C. police have a long history of being complicit with this cabal and turning a blind eye. Probably just another coincidence, the farm that the Finders cult had just happened to be in Virginia, the same place as the CIA headquarters. And the owner of the Washington, D.C. Comet Pizza, Jimmy Comet, James Alefantis of Pizzagate, he used to post tons of cryptid messages about children in the farm, like this one here on the screen where he's holding that same little girl from the first video, and he says, "That little baby loved the farm." Then he posts a picture of the same little baby sucking on a pile of international currency. The only people who ever get arrested in this crime syndicate are like the lower level gang members. It's just exactly like the drug cartels. Our prisons are full of the gang guys on the streets who were dealing the illegal drugs, who were peddling it for the big cartels. Those street level guys, yeah, they get busted and they get thrown in jail. But the crime syndicate guys at the top, the billionaires like Epstein, the CIA guys, they're above the law. This is an open secret. Everybody knows it. And it's not just about sex. That's a distraction. It's always coupled with this MK Ultra program. Inside these warehouses, inside these apartment buildings, they found brainwashing studios. They found equipment. They found MK Ultra programming going on, not just the prostitution. Same way with Jeffrey Epstein. In these older videos, we showed all of his funneling of the money was going into MK Ultra projects, mind control projects, the ECOG projects in China and at Harvard and all of these universities, MIT. He was funneling, he was a philanthropist, right? Well, all of his money was funneling into mind control projects. So it seems that this human trafficking issue is always connected to MK Ultra. It's not just about sex. It has something to do with this internet of bodies, especially in the breeding programs at the baby farms and the baby ranches and things like that. They're producing human children who don't have birth certificates and can be used in these MK Ultra experiments, and no one will even know they're missing or care. And the Finders cult documents that were recovered when they raided these different locations in the apartment building, the warehouse and stuff, showed lists of different ways. They had multiple ways to get children, to get more children. And yet the crime syndicate reigns and rules supreme above the law, above the rulers of nations, definitely above the presidents of this country.
At the Virginia farm, neighbors reported that they often saw vans containing children that were brought to the farm. According to the Tampa Tribune, one of the neighbors, a woman named Wilma Richards, said, "They'd be hollering and crying all the time, like they wanted something or something was hurting them." Wilma also explained that when she first met Marion Petty, he introduced himself as a Boy Scout leader. Although her and her husband were suspicious of the dozen or so men and children seen at their farm, they never phoned the authorities. On Friday, February 6th, Scott Hunt of the Tallahassee Police Department said, "It is our belief these kids were not kidnapped, but that their parents gave them away because one of the rites of passage into this satanic organization is that you have to give up your rights to your children. and that the leaders of this organization can do what they want with your children. It was around this time that a series of telephone death threats were being made towards the 6 children. The calls were described as brief and untraceable. This is strange because the children were transferred to a private foster home, and the police were careful to keep their location a secret. The Palm Beach Post reported that the authorities do not know where the calls originated from or how they located the children. To tell you the truth, we didn't anticipate any death threats against 6 obviously very forlorn children who are in a very sad state. The fact that we have received death threats has put us on alert, and these children are going to be guarded around the clock. Amidst all the chaos and mystery, the Tallahassee police managed to get in contact with a man identifying himself as Robert Terrell. Terrell and several other members of the Finders believed this all to be a giant misunderstanding, that once the police suggested the possibility of a satanic cult, the media blindly accepted it. Their story was published on the Tampa Tribune on Monday, February 9th. Terrell sent the police a 2-page memo detailing the Finders' activities in order to clear up any misunderstandings. In the memo, the 2 men and 6 children were originally on their way to Berea, Kentucky, where the group was to help establish a retirement community and where the children would be placed in school. However, this trip was delayed, so the group instead went vacationing in Florida with the approval of the children's mothers. Even the founder and financial developer for this retirement home, Reverend Jim Weicker and Carl Shapley respectively, chimed in to explain that the Finders were gentle people, searching for new dimensions in lifestyles. As for the photographs found of naked children and goats being slaughtered, Terrell explained that there were simple, innocent explanations for each. First, he explained that Michael Houlihan was a stepfather to one of the children and the biological father to another. The photo of naked children was there because, well, that's what parents tend to have. Terrell explained that the parents of all 6 children were members themselves of the Finders. However, he also notes that many of the adult members of this group were hiding around the country, fearing arrest. There were several reports of sightings of members in Gainesville, Miami, and Tampa. Police also reported that the mothers of the 6 children were in San Francisco. As for their leader, former members explained that Marion Petty was a retired Air Force Master Sergeant who, in the late 1960s, started the Finders group. He sought after those who were intelligent and into the counterculture scene. He would lecture them about the New Age way of living and Eastern mysticism. Marion and his followers decided to start a new generation of children that would be raised by them instead of their parents. And just like that, the Finders were seemingly cleared of suspicion. The media and several newspapers reported on the misconception, saying that, although the Finders were strange, there was no evidence of illegal activity. Both Houlihan and Ammerman were freed from jail. The charges were dropped and the case was closed. The whole event vanished from headlines as quickly as they appeared, and the Finders were attributed to nothing more than another instance of satanic panic hysteria. As you may have suspected, the official story given by Terrell and newspapers did not match up, or at sometimes conflict, with the details given by official reports. For example, Terrell claimed that the men and children were en route to Kentucky, despite Houlihan and Ammerman themselves saying they were going to Mexico. Furthermore, several women from the Finders cult, who claimed to be the mothers of the children, stated that their kids were well taken care of. They attributed their unkempt and dirty appearance to them just being kids, despite the reports of malnutrition and sexual abuse. Let's take a closer look at some of these official documents to see what else was suspiciously left out or ignored. On April 13th, 1987, an official U.S. Customs report by Special Agent Ramon J. Martinez was filed. The report mostly follows the same story published by the media. An anonymous call is made about 2 well-dressed and 6 dirty and unkept children in Myers Park, Tallahassee. The 2 men are arrested, and the 6 children are brought in for questioning. Authorities are eventually led to several properties and buildings that are believed to be owned by the finders. At this point, the stories begin to diverge slightly. Agent Martinez comes into contact with Detective Jim Bradley, who had already been investigating the finders since 1985. The two inspected the apartment building first, where they found large amounts of clothing for toddlers, such as diapers, and toys. They also uncovered documents with detailed instructions on how to obtain children, including trading, kidnapping, purchasing, and the impregnation of finders' members. Within a computer were telex messages from across the country and foreign locations about the purchasing of children. One message in particular specifically ordered the purchase of 2 children in Hong Kong to be arranged in the Chinese embassy. Other findings include an interest in bank secrecy situations, interest in high-tech transfers to the United Kingdom, numerous properties said to belong to the finders, an interest in terrorism and explosives, and how to avoid law enforcement. What's strange is that they also found a detailed summary of Houlihan's and Ammerman's arrest in Tallahassee. This is unusual because Houlihan and Ammerman were taken into custody the night before Martinez's and Bradley's investigation, and well before the Washington Post broke the story. So, somehow, the finders were already aware of their arrest, even before mainstream media. They were also given instructions on how to avoid police capture via a computer network. Agent Martinez and Detective Bradley reconnected the next day, Friday, February 6th, to investigate the warehouse on 4th Street. The warehouse contained a large library, 2 kitchens, a sauna, a hot tub, and a video room. Inside the video room was something described as an indoctrination center. Martinez goes on to report that the finders seemed capable of producing its own videos, and that jars of urine and feces were also found. At this location were documents describing explicit sexual conduct between members of the finders. A large collection of photographs were also uncovered, containing images of new children on display, adults and children in white sheets participating in a blood ritual, and goats being dismembered, disemboweled, and skinned by the children. Files revealing the activities of the finders in other parts of the world were found, including London, Germany, the Bahamas, Costa Rica, Japan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Africa, and Europe. Other files describe the finders' projects, such as one plan titled Pentagon Break-In. If that wasn't disturbing enough, there also seemed to be a large amount of information on families and child daycare organizations.
Okay, now just think about that. Back in the 80s, they find lists and troves of information on networks of preschools and daycares. And what do we see in the 1980s? Case after case after case after case after case of these children reporting that they were being taken out of preschools and daycares and that they were being raped and molested. And all of the reports, all of the medical reports that went with that. Remember the West Point daycare scandal and the one at the Presidio with that Satanist, Michael Aquino? That was just 1 year before the finders guys were arrested. So this is all at the same exact time. They find all these documents in the finders investigation relating to using daycares. And then you have daycares throughout the entire nation saying, yes, hey, this is going on. And they don't make the connection. Nobody makes the connection. I mean, I'm talking about like at the level of CIA and all of that. Of course they made the connection. They already knew about it. This is their own network. They went into cleanup and cover-up mode. So that's when we had the satanic panic, right? Where you're all crazy. It's just hysteria. They did the same exact thing back then that they are doing now. Back then, the catchphrase was satanic panic when people started to wake up to what was going on. Now it's QAnon.
Let me ask you about QAnon. It is this theory that Democrats are a satanic pedophile ring. Now, can you just once and for all state that that is completely not true and that disavow QAnon in its entirety?
I know nothing about QAnon.
I just told you.
I know very little. You told me, but what you tell me doesn't necessarily make it fact. I hate to say that. I do know they are very much against pedophilia. They fight it very hard, but I know nothing about it.
They believe it is a satanic cult run by the deep state.
Let me just tell you, what I do hear about it is they are very strongly against pedophilia, and I agree with that. I mean, I do agree with that, and I agree with it very strongly.
But there's not a satanic pedophile cult they
no
run
idea.
by.
I know
You
nothing
don't
about
know that?
But every single time that people start to become aware of their surroundings and wake up to this secret society that calls itself an intelligence agency and start to want to defend these children, they launch Project Mockingbird, and the Mockingbird media kicks in and people get brainwashed and they go right back into their trance. And you can see once they turn off the brains of the masses, then they go into pardoning all of their people in their crime syndicate. So all through the 90s and all the way up through the Obama administration up to 2013, they systematically went back and set all of those people free. It's almost laughable at this point. You know, even the new box office hit, the Sound of Freedom movie about child trafficking, every single one of the mainstream Mockingbird media throw QAnon in it. Even though it outperformed the Hollywood cabal movies, still, every single mainstream media threw in the word QAnon. NPR, why QAnon supporters are promoting the Sound of Freedom. The Guardian, Sound of Freedom, the QAnon-adjacent thriller seducing America. It is so ridiculous at this point that they're pointing the finger at themselves. They're exposing themselves, because what human being would not be concerned about these children? This is verifiable. The children featured in this movie are grown up now, and they are coming out giving their testimonies after the release of the movie. So here are victims of the most horrendous crimes you can imagine as children, and they are clearly far more concerned with discrediting the movie, discrediting the idea of child trafficking, making it a crazy conspiracy theory. They're far more concerned about discrediting the movie than feeling any sort of compassion or empathy or desire to help the child victims who were portrayed in this movie. Just total psychopaths. No empathy at all. Even in the church. Of course, it's the infiltrated, organized church, who is completely run by the enemy. But yeah, even a lot of the churches, the dead churches, are throwing the QAnon thing around. Sound of Freedom smuggling QAnon conspiracies into our churches. So they're exposing themselves to us as well, with pinpoint accuracy. All you have to do is look, and the very same churches who were pushing the transhumanist injections, who were telling their followers, yes, let the government experiment on you, let these billionaires inject you with experimental transhumanist injections, because that's an answer to prayer. God would want you to. God sent these injections. Those very same churches that were pushing the injections as the, quote, will of God are the very same ones who are saying, oh, but don't feel any compassion for sexually abused children. That's just a QAnon conspiracy theory. So it's pretty easy at this point to see who's who, the separation of the sheep and goats, the separation of the wheat from the tares. And it reminds me of what JFK warned about, that they infiltrate everything, and the network is so thorough that they have cover-ups inside of cover-ups inside of cover-ups, to the point you don't know who you can trust. It starts to feel like, there's only a handful, a remnant of humans left, and everybody else is already under control. For example, with the Sound of Freedom movie, I agree with Greg Reese, although I appreciate always anything that can bring exposure to this issue. I so much appreciate what they've done, but on the other end, the makers of the movie have now started sending people who want to report missing, exploited children to the very people and agencies who are running the sex trafficking rings, namely the Clinton and Podesta foundations. So, of course, I want to believe that's just because they don't know. They're just, putting up the suicide hotline type deal on their websites when they do a production like this, and they don't know who really runs those organizations. But on the worst case scenario side, then it has been infiltrated too. I mean, we have to be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. And one of the primary solutions, air quotes implied, that those agencies in turn are recommending, they're pushing right now to solve this problem of missing and exploited persons, is microchipping all of the children like we do animals. So this sneaky snake, the way they always work, they play on our emotions, they infiltrate our own movements and try to turn them against us. So they take something like the Sound of Freedom that could really help expose this worldwide child sex trafficking ring. Then they redirect everyone not just to place the reports with the exact perpetrators of the crimes, but also then they say, oh, you know what will help? Is if you take these biological implants, just take these injections. Just like they convinced everyone to take the transhumanist injections under the guise of vaccines. It's for your own good.
Many good-hearted people have strong emotions about the environment, and their emotions are so strong that they have been manipulated by a corrupt government to castrate themselves and castrate their own children to save the earth from climate change. This should teach us something about our emotions. They can blind us from logic and reason, and we all have them. This report is not a critique of the film The Sound of Freedom. I saw this film and I appreciate that it is bringing awareness to a subject that I personally have very strong emotions about. This report is about a clear red flag that people should be aware of so that we don't allow our emotions to blind us from logic and reason. According to MKUltra whistleblowers, the CIA acquired children for Project Monarch by cataloging child pornography sent through the U.S. mail. And the only thing that's changed since then is that the world has gone digital. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or the NCMEC, went international in 1999. The ICMEC was launched by Hillary Clinton and Tony Blair, with Richard Branson acting as a founding sponsor. It is now partnered with law enforcement in over 150 territories, including Interpol and Europol. In 2009, the Clinton Global Initiative partnered with the Polaris Project, and by 2014, they created a global modern-day slavery database of organizations in 199 countries to monitor human trafficking. Also in 2009, Amber Ready Incorporated selected the Podesta Group, the infamous pedophile art collectors of the WikiLeaks Podesta email scandal, to be their PR company, where they were responsible for promoting Amber Ready's cell phone technology, which created a database of children so that if they ever were abducted, their information was already on file. Once this child database syndicate was launched, human trafficking increased. Within 9 years, the human trafficking industry went from around $30 billion a year to $150 billion a year. Nearly all child pornography is processed and stored within this framework on foreign servers in Sweden. In 2014, President Obama assigned the task of how to manage this gathered intelligence data to John Podesta. The Clintons, the Podestas, and their friends are demonstrably involved on the criminal side of child sex trafficking. If this is news to you, I recommend my report from 2019, Are the Clintons Involved in Human Trafficking?, which is based on the well-researched article by Corey Diggs. And it is this group who manage and run Polaris, the ICMEC, and the NCMEC. And these are the same groups that Angel Studios, producers of The Sound of Freedom, are directing people to as a way to combat child trafficking. The billionaire who has been funding Tim Ballard's operation is Carlos Slim, who has also funded Hillary Clinton and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And if you believe that the Democrats are the problem, then I recommend you look into the Franklin cover-up and the Bohemian Grove. Pedophilia is how the hidden hand controls their politician puppets. Awareness of this horrific problem is good, and perhaps Angel Studios is unaware of who they are promoting. But if we think that the same NGOs whose efforts increased the child sex trade by 500% will somehow end child sex slavery, then maybe we are too emotional to think clearly. And that's a problem, because this same cabal is pushing a totalitarian surveillance state. They're already pushing the idea of microchipping your children to keep them safe. And without logic and reason, the people will demand it, and our children will be more enslaved than ever.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice.
According to this report, the finders would respond to various newspaper advertisements for babysitters, tutors, etc. A member would use this opportunity to learn about the habits, identity, occupation, and so on about the family. For what purposes were unknown to the investigators. Agent Martinez concludes his report with the hope that all the information would be sorted, reviewed, and logged by the Washington, D.C.'s Metropolitan Police Department, or the MPD. If his findings were to be true, this would be a strong case against the finders for child abuse and international human trafficking. However, none of that would happen. On April 2nd, 1987, Agent Martinez was to meet with Detective Bradley to review their findings. However, Bradley was unavailable. A third party, who was willing to speak to Martinez on an off-the-record basis, told him that the investigation into the finders had become a CIA internal matter and was classified as secret. The FBI also withdrew from the investigation, and from that point forward, no further information will be available. No further action will be taken. That's the story according to the US Customs report. However, in 2017, the Tallahassee police documents were acquired and uploaded online, and these documents would reveal much more information that was hidden from the public for 3 decades. First, an investigation into the finders' vehicle further reveals a few radios, boxes containing clothing, fruits, vegetables, a Chinese-English dictionary, a pack of Trojan condoms, a brown canvas bag containing photos of children, some nude, computer programming discs, a piece of paper titled The Ballad of Ballads, which made references to houses in Miami, Hawaii, San Diego, and China, and many, many other items. Second, there was an odd occurrence at Florida State University. According to this report, a student by the name of Robert Sorkine came across a small computer at a public phone booth on campus. During an interview, Robert explained that he was walking past the phone booth when he noticed the computer and took it home with him. During the weekend, he managed to start up the computer and attempted to figure out its owner. Robert discovered information concerning the Tallahassee Police Department and decided to turn the computer over to them. The TPD were able to determine that this computer was owned by somebody involved with the finders. Next, 2 of the 6 children, Mary and Max, would describe some of the games the finders would play. One involved taking off the men's clothes, putting them on, and then looking through the pockets. Both Mary and Max also noted that women would come downstairs with no clothes. During the interview, some of the other children urinated their pants, and one wanted to go outside to go to the bathroom. After a medical examination from the Tallahassee Department of Health and Rehabilitation Services, this report claimed that 2 children, Mary and Max, were confirmed cases of sexual abuse. Max lacked anal spectre control, consistent with sodomy, and Mary showed signs of penetration. John Paul had bite marks on his arm, but doctors couldn't determine if they were from an adult or child due to the marks being 5 days to 2 weeks old. As you can hopefully tell, these are very serious claims made by both detectives and medical experts. Yet, for whatever reason, these reports seem to be ignored. How is it that the media reported on finding no evidence of satanic cults or illegal activity, yet a mountain of evidence from the Tallahassee Police Department, the HRS, and Ramon Martinez conflicts with that? Why did the finders' men carry condoms with them? Why were they given a cover story to use if they were caught by the police? Why were there so many connections to China? The Chinese English dictionary, the files specifying ordering children from Hong Kong, the fact that Mary learned how to count to 10 in Chinese. News broke out that the Department of Justice began looking into the finders, this time under the aura of conspiracy. According to a private detective named Skip Clements, he claimed that the U.S. Customs Service investigators were called off of the investigation by the CIA. The investigation was impeded, said Clements. A senior official at Customs said it, the finders, was a CIA operation. Clements' accusations reached at least 2 members of Congress, who were reportedly unsure what to believe in. Regardless, the Department of Justice began conducting an investigation into whether or not the CIA were involved with the finders. However, a CIA spokesperson named David Christian claimed this to be a misunderstanding on Martinez's behalf. When Agent Martinez was told that the investigation into the finders had become a CIA internal matter, this was actually because one of the members of the finders was employed as a part-time accountant at a computer training school called Future Enterprises, Inc. However, according to the Washington Times, a 1987 police document quotes a CIA agent confirming his agency was sending its people to a Finders Corporation, Future Enterprises, for training in computer operations. It also notes that a later customs report said that the CIA admitted to owning the Finders organization as a front for domestic computer training operations, but that it had gone bad. Make that as you will. In an article by US News, Florida's House of Representative member Tom Lewis states, "Could our own government have something to do with this Finders organization and turn their backs on these children? That's what all the evidence points to, and there's a lot of evidence. I can tell you this, we've got a lot of people scrambling, and that wouldn't be happening if there was nothing here." However, the finders still uphold their innocence. In an interview between US News and Marion Petty himself, Petty describes the finders as a company that does freelance journalism, research, and competitor intelligence. He also denies any claims that they work for foreign companies. Petty claims that the reason why the CIA is interested in him and the finders is because his late wife once worked for the CIA. His son also worked for a CIA proprietary firm, Air America. When word first broke out about the finders, Lieutenant Lee Hart of the Virginia Police Department got in contact with somebody from the cult. This contact told Hart that Petty had alerted members to flee and hide. He further elaborated that Petty would have probably gone to the Andrews Air Force Base and take a military plane to China. The outcome of the Justice Department's investigation is never made clear in the documents that I was able to uncover. However, I think it's pretty safe to say that the investigation was either concluded or secretly dropped with no actions being placed against the finders or the CIA.
Okay, sorry. I know that was a long way around to get back to the Tony Rodriguez Secret Space Program interview. But since I so strongly disagree with Michael Sala's interpretation of this gentleman's experiences and many of the Secret Space Program victims, I decided to lay out my case, to lay out my context beforehand. So I was crystal clear when people watch this interview. I don't want anyone to think that I believe that they are going to outer space, because that's really Dr. Michael Sala's interpretation. And to this very day, this gentleman's interpretation of these memories now that are coming back of this program that he was in. He is not aware that he was in an MK Ultra augmented reality program. And I'm not saying that Dr. Michael Sala is counterintelligence or anything, and that he's purposely trying to redirect this narrative back into the mainstream idea that there are aliens on other planets, they're coming from outer space and all of that. Maybe he is well-intentioned and he just has tunnel vision and hasn't been exposed to, like, the works of Dr. Carla Turner here on the screen. You know, I've shown clips of her conferences and discussed her books and her research into alien abductees and their side of the story, how there was this element of virtual reality and augmented reality and artificial intelligence. And this was all back in the 90s, before anybody was talking about any of this or really knew about any of this. And she herself was an alien abductee, as well as her husband. And they both reported seeing the military in these experiences, working with these entities and experiencing this augmented reality, virtual reality. So maybe Dr. Sala just isn't aware of the full body of evidence, because he does so many interviews just with the secret space program that they're all sort of in this echo chamber. So they've got a tunnel vision of the subject. So maybe he's redirecting, maybe he just doesn't know. I don't know. I just wanted to make clear that I do not agree with their interpretation of the events, although I believe that Tony Rodriguez is being completely honest to the best of his ability, describing the raw data of what he encountered. And I would like you to at least consider interpreting his information in the context of what I just showed you about the MK Ultra programs, rather than just going along with the interpretation that Dr. Sala is leading him into.